Please, just for a moment, close your eyes. Take a slow, deep breath. Can you smell it? That heavy, unmistakable scent of strong filter coffee brewing on the kitchen counter, mixing with the sharp, papery aroma of a freshly delivered morning newspaper. Can you hear the rhythmic, reassuring ticking of the heavy grandfather clock in the hallway, grounding the entire house in a steady heartbeat? Today we are traveling back to the Netherlands of the 1970s and 80s. We are going to explore 20 deeply ingrained, wonderfully absurd everyday habits from our youth that modern generations simply cannot comprehend. We will revisit the quiet corners of our childhood homes, the rain-soaked bicycle rides, and the absolute magic of our living rooms. And please, stay with me until the very end, because we will talk about the one Sunday afternoon ritual that truly held our families together, a memory so incredibly warm, it might just bring a tear to your eye. Before we open the door to our past, we must remember how fundamentally different the flow of time felt back then. In our youth, time was not something you could instantly swipe away on a glowing screen. Time was measured in the slow boiling of water on a gas stove, in the long, dark days waiting for a postcard to arrive in the mail, and in the quiet anticipation of an entire family gathered around a single television set on a Friday evening. Modern society often pities the past, assuming that because we lacked instant communication and digital convenience, our lives were somehow poorer or less connected. But you and I know the profound truth. We know that our lives were infinitely richer in genuine, unfiltered human connection. When you had to wait for something, you valued it more. When you could only speak to a friend by knocking on their front door, the conversation held real weight. Our everyday habits, no matter how frugal or absurd they might seem today, were the beautiful, invisible threads that wove our communities and our families so tightly together. Let us begin with a ritual that perfectly captures the heart of our practical nature as a people. I want you to cast your mind back to the kitchen of your youth and try to recall the distinct, hollow sound of rubber scraping against the inside of thick, cold glass. In the 1970s and 80s, wasting food was not just frowned upon. It was practically an unforgivable sin in any respectable household across the country. When the tall glass bottle of sweet, creamy vanilla custard, which we all know so well, was finally nearing its end, we did not simply throw it away like they do today. Oh no! We reached into the cluttered kitchen drawer for our most trusted and brilliantly simple tool, the bottle scraper. This long metal rod, equipped with its flexible, semicircular silicone head, was an absolute masterpiece of domestic engineering. You would carefully slide it down the narrow, sticky neck of the bottle, pressing it firmly against the inside walls and pull upward with a steady hand. The ultimate goal was to rescue every single, solitary drop of that golden, sugary pudding. The tactile sensation of the cold metal handle in your palm, the funny little squeak of the rubber moving against the glass, and the sweet, delicious reward that ended up in your small glass bowl. It was a daily triumph of thriftiness. It taught our generation to appreciate exactly what we had, right down to the very last spoonful, in a deeply grounded way. And now, let us move from the kitchen into the living room, to the absolute institution of the circle birthday party. If you grew up in the Netherlands, you know exactly what I mean. When a birthday arrived, the furniture was meticulously rearranged. Every single dining chair, folding chair and armchair in the house was dragged into a massive circle along the walls of the living room. When you entered as a guest, you did not just congratulate the person whose birthday it was. You walked around the entire circle, shaking hands and kissing the cheeks of every single aunt, uncle, neighbor and vague acquaintance, repeating the phrase, "Congratulations on the birthday of your nephew or your neighbor." Once you finally took your seat in this grand arena, you were trapped in the best possible way. The air would grow thick with the smell of cheap cigars and heavy perfume. On the low glass coffee table in the center, there were small ceramic bowls filled with salted peanuts, pretzel sticks, and of course, the absolute highlight. Wooden toothpicks skewering perfect little cubes of young cheese and slices of liverwurst, often topped with a tiny silver onion or a pickled gherkin. It was formal, it was incredibly predictable, and yet it was the ultimate expression of our shared community. Do you remember the strict, unspoken etiquette that governed our daily coffee consumption? Life in our youth was anchored by immovable anchors of time, and the morning coffee break was sacred. At exactly 10:30 in the morning, the entire household or office would pause. The coffee was poured, strong and black, into small porcelain cups. But the true ritual was the presentation of the cookie tin. The host would carefully pry open the beautifully decorated metal lid of the cookie box, offering it to you with a solemn nod. You were allowed to look, to hover your fingers for a brief moment, and to select exactly one single cookie. Just one. Perhaps a buttery shortbread or a spiced speculoos. The very second your fingers retreated with your chosen prize, the metal lid would snap shut with a definitive, ringing sound. The tin was immediately whisked away and placed back in the cupboard. There was no casual grazing, no secondary offerings. That one single cookie had to be savored, nibbled slowly, and made to last for the entire cup of coffee. This beautiful restraint taught us discipline and made that single sweet treat feel like a tremendous luxury on a regular Tuesday morning. Let us step outside into the street and listen for a very specific mechanical hum. Before giant out-of-town supermarkets took over our lives, the supermarket came directly to our front doors. The arrival of the mobile grocery bus was a daily highlight for many neighborhoods. You could hear the heavy electric whine of the engine slowly turning the corner, followed by the screech of its brakes. The doors would fold open, revealing a magical, brightly lit aisle packed into a delivery truck. Your mother would hand you a small, handwritten list and a worn leather purse filled with heavy silver guilders and nickels. Stepping up into that bus was like entering a secret cave that smelled of fresh bread, damp linoleum flooring, and cold dairy. The driver knew every family by name. He knew who was sick, who had just had a baby, and who needed their groceries put on a tab in his little spiral notebook until payday. You would carefully balance your glass bottles of milk and a fresh loaf of brown bread in your arms, proud to be trusted with the shopping. It was not just a commercial transaction. It was a daily check-in, a vital pulse of neighborhood gossip, and a moving symbol of community care. There was another deeply embedded household habit that united nearly every family across the nation: the relentless, religious saving of coffee points. Every time a brick-shaped paper package of filter coffee was emptied, it was not immediately thrown into the bin. First, you had to carefully peel or cut out the little red paper seal printed on the back. These tiny pieces of paper were treated like absolute gold. We kept them in messy kitchen drawers, in old cigar boxes, or in small glass jars. On a quiet rainy afternoon, the grand ritual of pasting them would begin. You would dampen a small sponge, or sometimes just use your own tongue, and stick those dozens of little red seals into a special, designated booklet. It required patience and precision. We saved for months, sometimes years, pooling points with grandparents and neighbors, all for a collective goal. When the booklet was finally full, the trip to the special redemption store felt like a royal procession. Exchanging those small, painstakingly collected pieces of paper for a brand new, shiny set of teaspoons, a porcelain coffee cup, or even a brand new electric coffee maker brought a profound sense of shared achievement that modern loyalty apps will never capture. I want you to recall the absolute physical resilience required to be a child in those days. Think of the bicycle ride to school. There was no such thing as being driven to school in a warm, climate-controlled car just because the weather was bad. And the weather was almost always bad. We rode our heavy, steel bicycles through horizontal, punishing rain and fierce headwinds that seemed to push you backward with every pedal stroke. We did not have high-tech, breathable, waterproof athletic gear. We had heavy, stiff canvas coatas that absorbed the rain until they weighed an absolute ton, and thick woolen sweaters that smelled like wet sheep when they were damp. You'd arrive at school with your hair plastered to your forehead, your fingers numb, and your legs burning from the effort. In the classroom, dozens of soaking wet coats were draped over the blazing cast iron radiators, filling the room with the thick, suffocating smell of steaming wool and wet rubber boots. We never complained because everyone else was exactly as wet and as cold as we were. It was a collective rite of passage that forged our character and taught us that we could weather absolutely any storm life threw at us. When those cold, wet winter days finally ended and the sun set early, dinner provided the ultimate comfort. Do you remember the architectural masterpiece that was the evening meal of mashed winter vegetables and potatoes? When your mother placed a steaming plate of kale or endive mash in front of you, you did not simply start eating. First, you had to take your heavy silver spoon and carefully carve out a deep, perfectly round crater right in the center of the green and yellow mountain. You patted the sides down to ensure the walls of your potato volcano were structurally sound. Then the grand moment arrived. The hot, dark, intensely salty meat gravy was poured directly into that well. The trick, the absolute art of the meal, was to carefully eat away at the outside edges of the potato mountain without breaching the walls of the gravy well too early. If you made a mistake, the dark liquid would flood the entire plate in a tragic culinary disaster. The combination of the piping hot, savory fat, the soft, comforting potatoes, and the crispy bits of bacon on a dark winter evening was a tactile and culinary joy that made us feel perfectly safe and warm inside our homes. As the work week drew to a close, a different kind of magic took over the country. Friday night television was a sacred, unifying event. Because there were only 2 television channels, the entire nation watched exactly the same things at exactly the same time. The absolute peak of this shared experience was the weekly music program. The streets outside would be entirely deserted, dark and quiet, because every single teenager and young adult was glued to the glowing glass tube in the living room. We sat on the carpet, completely mesmerized by the flashing disco lights, the extravagant costumes, and the smooth voice of the presenter introducing the latest international hits. But we were not just passively watching. Oh no, we were working. We had our portable cassette recorders pushed right up against the small television speaker, a finger hovering anxiously over the record button. We tried desperately to capture the newest pop song onto our tapes, praying with all our might that our parents would not cough, talk, or walk into the room and ruin the fragile recording. The next morning at school or work, every single conversation started with the exact same question. Did you see what they were wearing on television last night? Communication back then required physical effort and real money. Try to remember the heavy, distinctive smell of a public telephone booth. Those solid glass and green metal cabins were scattered across every town square and railway station. When you needed to make a call, you stepped inside and pulled the heavy door shut, instantly enclosing yourself in a tiny, private world that always smelled faintly of damp coats and stale cigarette smoke. You held a handful of heavy silver coins, quarters and guilders, feeling their cold weight in your palm. You dialed the long, complicated numbers on the rotary dial, listening to the mechanical clicks. Then came the tension. You heard the ringing on the other end, but you could not speak yet. As soon as the person answered, you had to swiftly drop your heavy coin into the slot and press the metal button to open the line. The terrifying mechanical beep that warned you your money was running out would send your heart racing, forcing you to shout your final goodbyes before the line went dead with a harsh click. It made every single word you spoke incredibly valuable, because every word literally cost you a piece of silver. We must also talk about a sensory detail that is almost completely unimaginable today. The ever-present, thick blue haze of tobacco smoke. In the 70s and 80s, smoking was not an exiled activity. It was the absolute center of adult social life. Heavy glass or ceramic ashtrays were permanent fixtures on every single coffee table, dining table, and office desk in the country. During a birthday party, the living room would become so incredibly dense with smoke that your eyes would water, and the ceiling would slowly turn a permanent shade of nicotine yellow. Even authority figures smoked everywhere. You could sit in the doctor's waiting room, or even in the consultation room itself, and watch the physician thoughtfully puffing on a cigarette or a pipe while writing out your prescription. Fathers drove their cars with all the windows rolled up, happily rolling a cigarette of dark shag tobacco with one hand on the steering wheel, while the children in the backseat breathed in the thick clouds without a second thought. The smell of that specific rolling tobacco, clinging to heavy winter coats and woolen curtains, is a scent completely lost to time, but instantly recognizable to anyone from our generation. Let us turn to how we were taught to view the future, specifically through the National Youth Savings Program. Instilling a sense of financial responsibility was a national mission. Do you remember holding that small, physical paper passbook in your small hands? Every time you received a few coins for a birthday or for doing chores, you did not spend it immediately. You walked to the local bank branch in your neighborhood. You stood on your tiptoes at the tall wooden counter and proudly handed over your hard-earned coins to the friendly bank teller. They would take your little booklet, carefully write down the new amount with a fountain pen, and stamp it with a loud, satisfying thud. We were all saving in this specific youth account because of the magical promise that when you finally turned 18, the government would reward your patience with a massive premium bonus. Watching those handwritten numbers slowly grow over the years, page by page, taught us the profound value of delayed gratification. It gave us a tangible, physical connection to our own future, a feeling of security that numbers on a digital banking app can simply never provide. The technology of our youth was beautifully flawed and required constant manual intervention. Let us reminisce about the delicate art of rescuing an audio cassette tape. When we finally got our hands on a portable cassette player, it felt like absolute freedom. We could carry our favorite music in our jacket pockets. But that freedom came with a price. Often the internal gears would suddenly jam, and the machine would mercilessly chew up the fragile, thin brown magnetic tape. You would press eject in a panic and gently pull the cassette out, trailing a tangled mess of ruined ribbon. But we did not despair. We reached into our pencil cases for a standard hexagonal wooden pencil. You would carefully slot the end of the pencil into the white tooth wheel of the cassette and begin to spin. Slowly, painstakingly, you would wind the tape back into its plastic housing, smoothing out the crinkles as best as you could. The feeling of the pencil spinning in your fingers and the immense relief when you put the tape back into the player and heard the music start again, albeit with a strange, wobbly distortion where the tape had been crinkled, was a masterclass in patience and problem-solving. Weekends in our youth were marked by specific chores that physically transformed the household. Saturday afternoon was deeply associated with the pungent, waxy smell of leather shoe polish. In many homes, you could not simply wake up on Sunday morning and put on whatever shoes you liked. Sunday required absolute neatness. On Saturday, an old newspaper was spread out on the scullery floor or the kitchen table. Every pair of decent shoes in the house was lined up in a row. You would take the round metal tin of polish, pry off the tight lid with a coin, and apply the thick, black or brown paste with a small rag. Then came the physical labor. Taking the rough horsehair brush, you buffed the leather with quick, rhythmic, sweeping motions until a dull, matte surface miraculously transformed into a brilliant, mirror-like shine. Your hands would be stained, the air would smell sharply of beeswax and chemicals, but the deep satisfaction of seeing a row of perfectly gleaming shoes ready for the Sunday walk or church service gave a sense of order and pride to the end of the week. It was a tactile ritual of self-respect. The joy of reading was tied to a very specific weekly anticipation. I want you to remember the sound of the brass letterbox on the front door snapping loudly shut on a Thursday or Friday afternoon. For the youth, that single sharp sound triggered an absolute stampede. We would drop whatever we were doing and sprint to the hallway doormat, racing our siblings to be the very first to grab the newly delivered weekly comic magazine featuring a certain famous angry duck. If you won the race, you claimed the right to read it first, retreating to a quiet corner of the sofa. The smell of the cheap, vibrant ink on the thin, glossy pages is unforgettable. We devoured the colorful adventures, completely losing ourselves in the stories of that bustling fictional city. But the joy did not end there. Once you finished, the magazine was passed down to your brother, your sister, and sometimes even your father, who pretended to read it only for the clever wordplay. That single, stapled booklet provided days of shared entertainment passed from hand to hand until the pages were wrinkled and soft from use. When the deepest cold of winter finally arrived, a very specific, beautiful madness gripped the entire nation. It is a feeling that is becoming increasingly rare. The moment the news announced that the canals and lakes were freezing over, a collective fever broke out. Fathers would climb into dusty, freezing attics to dig out the old wooden skates. These were not modern, comfortable boots. They were flat wooden blocks with a sharp metal blade underneath, which you had to bind tightly over your regular winter shoes, using long, freezing leather straps that bit into your numb fingers. We would stumble awkwardly onto the natural ice, the freezing wind whipping our faces. The whole town was out there. You could hear the beautiful, rhythmic scraping of hundreds of metal blades cutting through the black ice. At the edge of the frozen water, small wooden stalls magically appeared, selling piping hot cocoa and warm pea soup. Standing there on the ice, blowing on a steaming cup, surrounded by the laughing faces of your neighbors with red cheeks and runny noses. We experienced an unparalleled sense of national unity and pure, unadulterated winter joy. In the evenings, when we were supposed to be sleeping, a quiet rebellion took place under the blankets of thousands of beds. We did not have endless streaming services. We had the thrilling, forbidden world of pirate radio stations. You would take your small plastic transistor radio, hold it close to your ear, and slowly turn the tiny plastic dial in the dark. You had to navigate through a sea of hissing static and strange frequencies, searching for the signal broadcasting from a ship anchored way out in the choppy waters of the North Sea. When you finally caught it, the sound was pure magic. The upbeat, energetic voices of the rebel disc jockeys cutting through the static, playing the loud, exciting pop and rock music that the official state broadcasters refused to play. The signal would fade in and out with the rolling of the ocean waves, making the music sound distant and mysterious. Lying there in the dark, listening to a voice broadcasting from a freezing ship miles out at sea made you feel like you were part of a secret, youthful revolution, connected by invisible radio waves to thousands of other teenagers doing exactly the same thing. The start of our mornings was a stark contrast to the luxurious routines of today. Do you remember the absolute shock of the morning wash? Central heating was often a luxury reserved only for the living room, meaning the upstairs bathroom was bitterly, painfully cold in the winter. We did not stand under steaming hot showers for 20 minutes. Instead, we stood shivering in front of a cold ceramic sink. The cornerstone of this daily ritual was the simple, rough cotton washcloth. Your mother would hand you a bar of heavy, yellow soap that smelled intensely of baby powder or pine, and you had to scrub your face, neck and arms with freezing tap water. The rough texture of the terry cloth against your cold skin woke you up faster than any cup of strong coffee ever could. It was efficient, it was practical, and it was entirely unglamorous. But that simple, shivering routine built an incredible resilience. It was just how life was, and that daily dose of cold reality ensured we were wide awake, incredibly clean, and completely ready to face whatever hardships the grey skies of the day might bring. Even when we managed to escape the grey skies and go on a summer holiday, we carried our profound sense of duty with us. Sending vacation postcards was an absolute, non-negotiable obligation. Whether you were camping in a rainy tent in France or staying in a cheap hotel in Spain, you had to find a souvenir shop with a squeaking, rotating metal rack of glossy postcards. You would carefully select 10 or 15 cards, sit down at a wobbly cafe table and begin the chore. We did not write poetic descriptions of our travels. We wrote the exact same, highly standardized message on every single card. The weather is beautiful, the food is good, we are having a nice time. Greetings to everyone. You would lick the exotic, foreign stamps and drop them into a strange red or yellow mailbox, praying they would find their way back home. The beautiful absurdity of this ritual was that, because international mail was so incredibly slow, you almost always arrived back home in the Netherlands weeks before your postcards did. You would visit your aunt, and she would point to the card you wrote a month ago, proudly displayed on her mantelpiece, thanking you for the lovely message. There was also a specific anxiety that hovered over our households, tied to a very strange bureaucratic rule. I'm talking about the dreaded viewing and listening tax. In those days, owning a television or a radio meant you had to pay a special license fee to the government. To prove you had paid, you received a tiny piece of paper, a stamp, that you had to keep safe. But of course, money was tight, and many families tried to bend the rules, perhaps keeping a second unregistered black and white portable television hidden in the parents' bedroom. The tension would spike when a stern-looking man in a grey trench coat, the government inspector, suddenly rang the front doorbell. The absolute panic that ensued was comical. Children were urgently whispered to run upstairs and hide the portable television under a pile of heavy winter blankets or shove the extra radio deep into a closet before the mother calmly opens the front door to show the inspector her single, legal paper stamp. It was a subtle, nationwide game of hide-and-seek with the authorities, adding a bizarre thrill to simply owning household appliances. And finally, let us turn to the most comforting ritual of all, the one that gently closed out our weekends. Think of Sunday morning. Before the family even left for church or for a walk in the woods, a massive heavy metal pot was placed on the lowest possible flame of the gas stove. Inside that pot was a clear, rich broth. All morning long, the entire house would slowly fill with the deep, savory, incredibly comforting aroma of simmering beef bone, fresh celery, leeks, and carrots. But the absolute best part had happened the night before. On Saturday evening, sitting at the kitchen table, you would help roll hundreds of incredibly tiny, perfectly round meatballs out of seasoned minced meat. Your hands sticky and cold. Dropping those tiny meatballs into the bubbling broth on Sunday afternoon was the final touch. When Sunday evening arrived, signaling the end of the weekend and the looming start of the school week, sitting down to a steaming bowl of that homemade soup was like receiving a warm hug from the inside. It grounded us, it comforted us, and it reminded us that no matter what happened in the world outside, we were safe, warm, and together at our own kitchen table. As we look back at these 20 beautiful, absurd, and deeply comforting habits, we must ask ourselves, do we really just miss the taste of the custard or the smell of the shoe polish? No. I believe what we truly mourn is the time when we were required to be present. We miss a time when everything took effort, and because it took effort, everything had profound value. We miss the feeling of sitting in a crowded, smoke-filled circle, knowing absolutely every single person in the room. We do not just miss our youth, we miss the tangible, physical connection we had with our families, our neighbors, and our time. If these memories brought a warm smile to your face today, please do subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video, so we can continue this beautiful journey into our shared past together. Now I want to ask you, which of these memories brought you right back to your childhood home? Or do you have a completely different Sunday ritual you miss dearly? Please, take a moment to write your story in the comments below. I promise to read them, and I cannot wait to share in your memories. Until we meet again, stay warm and hold on to those beautiful days.